up above began to rattle, and the bell up in the belfry began to bong irregularly. And the sexton later said, "Well, no, it wasn't me. I wasn't pulling the rope." Now that was the wind that had come up. And Reverend Prince paused, took all this in, raised his hands and said, "O God, we hear thee. We hear thee. Thou hast answered our prayer. Thou hast sunk those frigates to the bottom of the sea, O God." What did he have, a nice cell phone to say, "Ah, they're going down, they're going down"? No, he didn't have that. He just felt like God was answering their prayer. And do you know, a little over a week later, it was reported that on that very day, when they were assembled in the Old South Church, a storm had suddenly arose out in the Atlantic, violent storm, and had literally sunk nearly every one of those French frigates to the bottom of the sea. And the few that were left limped on back to the West Indies from which they came. Charleston had not been burned, New York had not been burned, Boston had not been burned. Once again, the colonists had been saved. That's another stop on the Freedom Trail. You interested in going on the Freedom Trail? Boy, that's one of dozens of stories we could tell you that used to be taught in the schools of our nation that are not taught anymore. Now, I just think we're cheating our students when we don't tell them history straight up the way it really happened. But that's another story. And I tell you that because the Freedom Trail is a great experience. And I hope each of us today thinks of himself as walking the Freedom Trail today. We're going to do that because we're going to blaze a Freedom Trail with particularly one of the founders, and that's Thomas Jefferson, who seemed to be the one more than all of them. Each one of them kind of had their niche. Have you noticed that as you study them? Thomas Jefferson's kind of his niche, his mission, if you would, was to think all this through, try to come up with the philosophy behind freedom and liberty. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to study where the founders got their good ideas and why it made so much sense to them and how they worked those ideas into the Constitution. Ideas, my friends, that will solve every problem we've got in America today. That's a big statement. And you don't know how big that is unless you study the founders who are saying, we have the answers. That's what they're saying if we listen to them, if we read them. So we're going to get acquainted with all that today. And I'm just so glad that you're here to walk the Freedom Trail with the founders today. So I want to ask you this question. Well, first of all, if you'll turn open to page 6 in your book. Now, I must admit, right from the beginning, if we took time to go through every page in this book, we would be here for 13 hours. I don't think that's our agreement, is it? 13 hours?
We'll stay.
Yeah, this group would stay, I'm sure. Well, I guess we could. Bill and I don't have to catch a plane until early tomorrow morning, but anyway, but we're here at least until 4:30, and so we won't be covering everything in this book. We'll get to the end, but I'm going to give you a little homework assignment in between, and this is the first one because we're going to start on page 6. We're going to leave the beginning few pages for your homework, okay? By the way, has anybody discovered our little secret in our book? Our little secret? Oh yeah, see, where does a student always look when he gets a new textbook? In the back for the answers. So if you'll look in the back, there they are. All the answers to the blanks. Now I hesitated telling you that right from the beginning because I hope you don't go like this. Just to fill in your blanks. You'll have time to do that at home, right? I hope you listen to me because as you'll notice, I'm not going to be reading this. I'm just going to be talking to you. We're going to be telling some stories. I'm going to be explaining some things to you. And every once in a while I'll say, now that's the blank for letter A, and you'll look down, there's letter A, and you'll write it in. That's what I hope you'll do. But when you get home and you're reading through the material, know that there's the blanks there and everybody's happy. Some people just don't like to leave a blank empty. It bothers them. So now you know where the answers are. We won't be bothered by that, okay? All right. You know, as you study history of the world or of the United States, and you find out that you can relate incidents that happen, administrations, kings, almost any kind of government, basically into two categories. And these categories have very technical names, but we've given them very easy names to remember. And the two categories are this: ruler's law and people's law. Who do you think makes the rules in ruler's law? The ruler, right? Who do you think makes or accepts the law under people's law? The people. And it's kind of interesting as you go study history, for example, of the United States. You can say, well, President so-and-so did this. Oh, that's an element of ruler's law. Or you might say, that's an element of people's law. See, if you know about these two kinds of law, you can kind of see us go like this all the way through our history. Sometimes it gets a little more on this side, doesn't it? And so that's kind of getting a little scary, but at least we're identifying it. So after Columbus came in 1492, what was the first major nation in Europe to come to the New World? First major nation after Columbus?
Spain.
Spain, right? What kind of law did the Spanish bring? Ruler's law. No question about it. Ruler's law. And then mostly during the next century, they were blunted by another nation. What was the second nation that came? Major nation that came? France. What kind of law did the French bring? Ruler's law. You got one ruler's law, people butting up against the head of another, leaving a nice little pocket on the eastern seaboard for a whole different kind of people with a different kind of law, at least written in their hearts. Who were these? The English. And the English. Do you know that by the time the Declaration was written, there were 3 million Englishmen in America? And that's your blank. If you look on page 6, down at letter E, your first blank there is 3 million. You just write that in, 3 million. And they brought with them elements of people's law. And that's your next blank for letter E at the end, people's law. But where did they get this? Well, Jefferson, in his studies, found out that his own and these English ancestors were the Anglo-Saxon, and that's your blank at the very bottom of page 6. Anglo-Saxon, the early inhabitants of England. They had brought this with them when they came into the island of Britain in 450 A.D. and set up a beautiful system of government, Anglo-Saxon system, that lasted until that tragic hook date of history in 1066. Who can tell us what happened in 1066? The Norman invasion. William the Conqueror came over, conquered the Anglo-Saxon people, and corrupted their form of government, and that's your blank for letter B. Corrupted their form of government. And in letter C, I won't take time to read it, you have a quote from Thomas Jefferson, yearning for the restoration of these wonderful principles, these Saxon ancestors that had this form of government. We'll study that a little bit later. And so this set up a conflict between the Norman kings and the Saxon people. Do you remember that conflict? Have you read about it? You've seen movies about it? Give me some movies or some novels between the Saxon people and the Norman kings. What are some of those novels? Robin Hood. Very good. Robin Hood. Another one? About Ivanhoe. Familiar with these classics? See, this is the Saxon people trying to get the king to recognize their rights that they had lost in 1066. And letter D in 1215, just 150 years later, the people got together and says, maybe what we need to do is write some of our rights down. See, this was one of the weaknesses of Anglo-Saxon law. It wasn't written down. And our founding fathers said, if you want to preserve our rights, you better